the streaming. So welcome. Great turnout this evening, even in some terrible weather. And our speaker this evening is an old friend of mine, actually. Anthony Trousseau is a ranger at the Manassas National Military Park. He has also been a ranger at multiple other sites, including right down the road at Monocacy National Battlefield. However, Anthony is speaking under his own auspices as a researcher and historian tonight. He'll be speaking on a regiment and its very, sometimes controversial commander. We'll be looking at the 61st New York Infantry in depth this evening, along with its commander, Francis Barlow. So, Anthony, are you all set, buddy? Oh, apparently I'm getting a 1 minute. But again, we're going to be having the presentation, and then I'm asking the board members to stick around for a couple of minutes afterwards tonight. We need to talk a little bit of shop. But beyond that, I think we're ready to go. And let's everybody welcome our speaker this evening, Anthony Trousseau.
Thank you, Matt. Just had people texting saying they couldn't find the live stream online, so I was just trying to make sure it was. I just let them know. So how's everybody doing? Great. Has anybody been to Manassas? Yeah. All right, cool. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself real quick. I've worked at about 6 or 7 other national park sites. Fredericksburg, Harpers Ferry, Petersburg, Manassas, Monocacy, First State, and then small little pencil thing downtown called the Washington Monument, and Ford's Theater down there. So, even before that, I got interested in the Civil War. Stereotypical, right? Go to Gettysburg, right? Get the bug that way. Watch the movie. Think for a whole bunch of time that the war was just 3 days in a small town in Pennsylvania that's got a college in it, right? So, but it goes beyond that, right? It's just not 3 days or 72 hours in Pennsylvania, not 1 day up the road, not 2 days over there in Maryland. Unpopular opinion, right? 2-day Battle of Antietam, right? There you have it. It involves much bigger than that. And my personal interest is in the nitty-gritty, right? The soldier's experience. Not what these officers are writing, not what generals are writing, but the actual men who are pulling the trigger and getting killed in the service of their nation. And to that end, talking about the 61st New York Infantry. Have any of you heard of them before? Okay. 61st New York is one of the best fighting outfits in the United States Army for all 4 years. That's not me telling you that. That's the men themselves writing, so maybe a little bit of bias there in that. But their second commander is pictured here in the painting. So we're going to play a quick game before I get into the hardcore stuff. Are you ready? There's going to be a series of photos that are going to flash on the wall here. You have to shout out the first thing that comes to mind when you see the image. Are you ready? Okay, first image is here. Don't give me the name, give me an opinion. Slow. All right. Give me an opinion of that guy. Worse than that guy.
He knew his limitation. He didn't want to go above corps commander.
How about that guy? Superb. You see what I'm doing here? I'm drilling down. We're getting down to the 61st New York. Every single person that is flashing on the screen is in one way or another related to the regiment and the man that we're going to talk about for this amount of time. You've got a commander of an army that he hates, a commander who sort of fights alongside him, a man who he's photographed with. Who's that guy?
Future brother-in-law.
Future brother-in-law. All right, Robert Gould Shaw. How about this man? Any idea who he is? General-in-Chief of all United States armies after the war. Third commander of the 61st New York.
Nelson Miles.
Nelson Appleton Miles. Ever heard of him before? An opinion of him?
Bad Indian killer.
Well, let me flash another guy up there.
There he is.
Give me an opinion of him.
Newspaper boy.
I heard a 4-letter negative word. I heard a 3-letter young kid. Okay, that's 3 negative opinions of the man.
Left is what?
Any positivity? How many years removed from the war are we? Have you met him? Have you met him? Have you met him? Will you meet him, any of these men? That's us 160 years later saying that a man we did not fight under, we did not serve with, we were not a contemporary with, and it's a completely different opinion than any man that had ever served under him. And that's a completely different opinion than the men in the regiment. And a completely different opinion than Nelson Miles had of him. And a different opinion than what Winfield Scott Hancock had of him. So who was Francis Channing Barlow? Well, short answer, a New Yorker whose father left him as a kid, family moved to Massachusetts, entered Harvard Law, graduated, #1 in the class, moved back to New York, met a lady, 10 years his senior, from the greatest state in the Union, New Jersey. There you go. There's no good pizza and bagels, right? You can't find them anywhere outside of New Jersey. So, people comment about this relationship between Mr. Barlow and Arabella. They're saying, some people talk negatively about them, saying, "Who's that boy that she's with?" Or, "Oh, it's nice that your child is there with you." Or,
Did she have money?
yes. And there's if you want to go with the ego thing, young kid, 20, 23, 24, 25, trying to hit it big in New York. Older than me, making money. Yeah. Well, what does he do? He enlists in the 12th New York Regiment, 12th New York Infantry in 1861. April 18th, 1861. April 19th, 1861. Guess what? Hooray, wedding bells in New York City. You want to know the shortest honeymoon? Here it is. Within a couple of hours, he's mustering into the regiment. First commander of the 12th, the only commander of the 12th New York, 3-month unit, a guy named Dan Butterfield. Heard of him before? Well, in some letters that he wrote home, talks about very negatively of Butterfield. The 12th New York is not present at Bull Run or Manassas, right there out fighting under Patterson over there in the Shenandoah Valley. And by the end of his service in 3 months, Francis Barlow has started as a private. Right, so back up, he's not a military man by trade. He's a lawyer. He's a civilian. Becomes a private lieutenant within 3 months. And then he writes home saying something, which is in here. Pardon me a second. "I shall return to New York the moment our time is up, and I shall not enlist again, at least at present. I am sick of this damned regiment." Sounds like maybe he doesn't want to keep going, right? Leaves the service after 3 months, goes back to New York, gets involved in lower-ranking Republican politics. And while he does that, something else is going on in the state. And that something else in the state has to do with this man. This guy, Spencer Wallace Cone, son of a Baptist minister, good friends with Daniel Edgar Sickles. That's the last time you're going to hear me say that man's name for the rest of it. Dan Sickles. Cone has made some money prior to wanting to do anything with the military. He's written some books, written about mythology. One of those literary types, as one soldier that will fight under him called him. And Cone, with his high prominence of knowing men like Sickles, men like Oliver Otis Howard, men like the governor of New York. In the summer of 1861, while Barlow is out in Western Virginia, what does Cone do? Puts together a unit. 61st New York Volunteer Infantry. Here's some quick, bad quality clippings from Chronicling America here, but the regiment starts to piece together. It'll be ultimately 7 companies from New York City and 3 from upstate New York. One man says, "We were recruited mainly in the coal boxes and were rough, insubordinate, as it seemed, poor material. But we became model soldiers and were found to be better able than the countrymen to withstand the hardships and privatizations of a soldier's life." We're talking about the 7 companies of city boys that showed up in the regiment. So all through August, all through September, all through October, the regiment's coming together. So now back up. Is that the rain? So August, September, October. 3 months, right? When did Barlow muster into the service of the 12th New York? April. April to May, 1. May to June. June to July. So he's out. Then this other regiment starts to get in. Remember, I don't want to go back, right? Go back about 100 years. There's this guy from Virginia who showed up at the Continental Congress wearing a uniform of a military man over and over and over and over again. And then we'll say, "Oh, no. I don't want to take any command." George Washington? I don't want any part. I don't want any part. How about a lieutenant colonelcy starts to get floated over Francis Barlow? Well, what would you do, right? I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I've had enough of this damned regiment. And all of a sudden, the lieutenant colonelcy starts flowing in front of you. But before that happens, Spencer Cone, as his regiment's coming together, and it'll ultimately number 803 officers and men gathering on Staten Island. His officer corps will start to come up with a vote to get rid of him, citing that he is not fit for duty, he is not fit for command, he has no idea how to move troops around. And so Cone listens to the orders of his men and his officers, and he takes off. They move their campsite, and then it's rumored that Spencer Cone is coming back. And he gets back, and he demands that the entire regiment, no longer the colonel of the unit, right, demands that the entire regiment comes out on the color line, and that every officer who voted against him step out in front and give him absolute loyalty. He will pardon them if they agree to give him absolute loyalty. And all but 2 agree to that. All but 2. Hard to read here, but there are the top 3 officers in the unit on there. Colonel, lieutenant colonel, major. Guess who the 2 men who say "see you later" to Spencer Cone are? The lieutenant colonel and the major of the unit. And that's going on in September, October time. The regiment will leave New York on the 10th of November, 1861, bound for Philadelphia. They will leave Philadelphia on the 11th of November, get to Washington City on the 12th of November. 3 days later, somebody else shows up into their camp. Remember that vacancy? Here's the filler. Now Lieutenant Colonel Francis Channing Barlow. Had enough of the damned regiment, but probably not enough of the damned war, right? No, not really. Hasn't really gotten going that much. Charles Fuller, who I'll reference quite a bit tonight, is the author of the only known memoir of the unit, Personal Recollections of the War of 1861. One memoir for an entire regiment that's going to see action at the Bloody Lane, at the Wheat Field, Marie's Heights at Fredericksburg, the Bloody Angle at Spotsylvania, the entire 292-day siege of Petersburg. They're present in Appomattox. They fight in the 2nd Corps of the Army of the Potomac, right? Pick a battle that the Army of the Potomac's involved in. Who does all the fighting? Or a majority of it? One memoir? So that's why there's not much info to run with when it comes to the 61st New York. A lot of it comes from Charlie Fuller. Fuller starts the war as a sergeant, will leave it as a lieutenant, not of his own doing. July 2nd, 1862 has something to do with that, right? The regiment will go into the wheat field with 110 men, and they will come out with about 45 to 50. One of those 45 to 50 will not be Fuller. Fuller gets wounded, has his arm and his leg amputated later on. But Fuller has a lot to say about Barlow and Cone. And I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what the men are talking about as one man. Here's Cone on Barlow, right? So first impression of Barlow. He is a thorough officer and behaves uprightly to me. As a soldier, he is a martinet. So there we go, negativity, but Cone is not below him. Cone is above him, right? I don't believe he ever liked or disliked anything human. If I ever have a chance to making him a judge, he shall be one. In the discharge of his duty, he is untiring and exact to a hair. But here we go. Hard and repellent in manner, and eminently gifted with the talent of making enemies. Now there's coming from above. Let's go to Fuller. This is Fuller on Barlow. Schools were established for commissioned and non-commissioned officers, and rumor credited Barlow with their establishment. Discipline was strict, but in a short time there was a feeling in the air that the strength of the regiment lay in the person of the lieutenant colonel. Great soldier, fully equal for a corps command. He knew the details of his business, and he had the military instinct and was fearless. As time went on, and as it was seen that he knew more than any other man in the regiment, that he knew how to work his men to the best advantage, and that when danger was at, he was at the head leading him, any animosity that was felt was turned into confidence and admiration. Where's the negativity? Cone, but not the men that he's going to be leading into their deaths, right? Here's another man. So stern was the discipline commanded by Barlow, and so renowned did the regiment become by reason of that discipline that the veteran regiments of the division dubbed us as Barlow's regulars. A little bit more about the boy general. He was medium-sized, slender man who, no beard, looked like a boy. I would think I'm medium-sized. I'm definitely not slender. No beard. I mean, what do you think? But anyway. There you go. The spirit that animated him was a mighty one, and the discipline which he enforced endeared him to both officers and men alike. No soldier from this state was his equal in anything which goes towards the making of a great soldier. So there's a little bit about that first impression that the men are having of Barlow as he strolls into camp 13 November 1861. Where are they set up? Where are they set up? Anybody familiar with Washington City? Okay. Gallaudet University, then called Kendall Green, site of this camp that the 61st New York is starting to put together. Down here at the bottom. Again, to the site today of Gallaudet University. Later on, there will be a hospital set up on that site, a place called Finley Hospital, but that is post the 61st New York being there at Kendall Green. Within a couple of weeks, Cone gets the regiment. A lot of Union soldiers around there get up, and they head on out. Where are they headed to? Well, as Fuller talks about, they're passing down this long road, down across the long bridge, passing by the Washington Monument, or third, all the cows that are hanging around it. And they head to a place called Camp California. That's where the black arrow is. Now, when I first started getting into them, they all talk about Fort Worth. I had never heard of Fort Worth. The most common fort with a W around Washington City is a place called Fort Ward. And so I just assumed that they didn't know what they were talking about. And then I opened up a map and saw Ward, and then look right below it. Right, so they're in the shadow of that, and they will spend a couple of months there The regiment by December, though, is hit with some problems. On December 12th, Cone writes home to his wife, saying that I am sorry to say that many of my men are sick. All right, here we go. City boys, 7 companies. Who are the other 3? Out from the country. 63 men are down with measles, and unless we are mercifully saved from it all, the country companies will have it. We city boys had it tough, had it young, but the country ones are babies in that respect yet. In the OR, since we're in a medical building here, Series 1, Volume 5, the surgeon of the 61st New York reported as a reason for his large sick report that he had a large number of broken down men. Many 60 to 70 years old, many affected with hernias, old ulcers. Sickness rate in February 1862, out of the 725 men present, 81 sick. Percentage of that, about 12. So 12% of the regiment. By the end of the year, 150 men will be affected by the sickness, but only 3 will die. Only 3 will die. The regiment makes a couple of moves. As January, February starts to happen, where are they headed to? Cone says, let's go to Springfield Station. They exchange some gunfire. In Cone's letters, he talks about that it's this great thing that the regiment did. Barlow, 2 days later, writes home to his mother, saying that Cone is the gassiest man he ever met, and not to believe a single thing that is printed in the newspapers. Fuller talks about that the regiment is headed towards Molasses Junction. His spelling, not mine. Right? But for the most part, for these couple of months, they're hanging around Camp California. In February, Spencer Cone is approached by folks from the New York Herald and the New York Tribune. What was his previous career, right? Writing. And he will write a song called Charge Bayonets to the tune of John Brown's Body. Go have a look on the Library of Congress. Go have a look on, you can read the full, this is page 1, 4 pages of sheet music. Good luck trying to sing it, because it's hard. I mean, the words are cool, the words are nice, but whoever picking that song as the tune was not serving Cone very well. And this here is a quick snippet from a New York Herald saying that the character of this music can be better judged when it is stated that the tune alluded to this one generally. No, you get the idea. Cone is trying to get something going while they're hanging around in February. That brings us to this slide here. So there's the 2 men of the hour, right? To the left, Spencer Wallace Cone. To the right, Francis Channing Barlow. Do they like each other? What do you think? Have I given you any impression that they are best friends? Cone has a knack for not really listening to anybody. Right? He had a first vote when the regiment gathered. They didn't want him. The same officer corps is still there. They haven't gone to fight anywhere yet. January of 1862. January 16th. What's today's date? 19th? So 161 years ago, 3 days ago, we were in the midst of something in the camp of the 61st New York. My subordinates have shot their bolt, and whether it will hit or miss depends on Providence. They have brought a long string of railing accusations against me, none of them affecting my moral character, and whilst they accuse me of not of talent and are record in their protestations of great personal esteem and affection for personal good qualities. What the regimental officer corps has done is they put together a series of 8 different accusations against Cone. And they presented it to him, and then they went over his head and presented it to their brigade commander. The brigade commander of the 61st New York is a guy named Oliver Otis Howard. at this point, who is friendly with the man on the left. But Cone calls their bluff a little bit. Instead of letting the accusations go forward, Cone makes the decision, all right, I am going to be taking the first step, and I'm going to call a court of inquiry in myself. And I know for a fact, as he says in his letters to his wife, I know for a fact that that court of inquiry will clear me completely. Barlow is not one of the signatories on any of the complaints against Cone. But in a letter home to his mother, he unleashes on him. Neither the lieutenant colonel, that's him, neither the colonel or the major have any capacity whatever for doing anything or for overseeing or commanding the regiment, and I do it all. I am perfectly satisfied. I begin to be disgusted with Cone. He is not fit to command a drove of hogs. All that I say about him must be strictly to yourself. So he's telling his mother, don't go tattletaling on me. While I'm not going to sign on to these complaints, I am wholeheartedly out to get him. But I've had enough of this damned regiment, right? February. This is Barlow. We are in the midst of a ferment here. 9 charges of his utter incompetence in knowledge, character, and capacity. It was accompanied by a request to resign. I had nothing to do with starting or originating this. I could, of course, do nothing other than concur in it. I pity him, for he is a generous, kind-hearted gentleman, and my personal relations with him have been most pleasant, but he is utterly unfit for this place. The regiment is going to ruin. My relations with the colonel are now none at all, but that does not impair the pleasure of my life. And it goes on to March. It goes on into April. In March, Barlow writes, the colonel is still not gone. I have no idea that the influence of such scoundrels as Sickles will accomplish anything, and I have a firm conviction that we shall get rid of him within a week. Under Cone, everyone is listless, and everyone, even the men, begin to be disgusted with him. Is Cone not a miserable cuss? That's not me saying that, that's Barlow, but I mean, coming to this point, I mean, he doesn't want to leave. But he does, and Barlow takes over the regiment on the 13th of April, 1862. This picture is fascinating to me, I think, right? We see all those other pictures of Francis Barlow, but what about 25-year-old Private Barlow? Right, here he is. So Barlow takes over the regiment. Where are they headed? Right? It's George McClellan's time to shine. Takes the whole entire Army of the Potomac, puts them on boats, and where are we headed? Right down to the peninsula. Here's a period sketch of the regiment around Yorktown. But the first test of the regiment, Matt, it worked. The first of the regiment is along the tarmacs and runways of the Richmond International Airport. Okay, 7 Pines. Right, the regiment is not involved the first day of the action. Part of Sumner's Corps, Howard's Brigade, Richardson's Division. They'll go into the fight. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds of what they do, but Barlow takes the men forward. They see a New York regiment lying down. Barlow decides, unordered, that he's going to push straight through into this dense foliage. Gets a little bit beyond it, and they receive fire toward them. A couple of minutes, back and forth, gunfire with Confederates in front of them. A couple minutes later, Barlow takes the regiment, sends them straight ahead. They go into Seven Pines with 375 men in the ranks, 42 sergeants, a colonel, a lieutenant colonel, an adjutant, and 15 company officers. Barlow at one point assumes temporary command of the brigade when Howard goes down with a wound. Now Howard and Phil Kearny can share a pair of gloves, right? Barlow, after the battle, says that we have for duty 1 colonel, 9 company officers, 388 enlisted men, of whom 17 are drummers. I have reorganized the regiment into 8 companies, each but with 1 commissioned officer. The man pictured here, Eugene Demings, 21-year-old captain, wounded at the beginning of the month, June 1st, 1862. He will die June 30th, 1862. Barlow talks about in one of his letters that he comes upon a man who was shot straight through the side of the head, and it knocked both of his eyeballs out of their sockets. And when he made contact with him, the man was still walking. A couple minutes later, collapsed in front of him dead. They go in with the lieutenant colonel. They come out without a lieutenant colonel. They go in with a lieutenant colonel, they come out without one. Barlow needs to fill that position. Well, he got friendly with a staff officer on Oliver Howard's staff, a captain, pictured here on the left, named Nelson Appleton Miles. And so Miles will come out, as a staff officer, will rise to now take the second in command of the regiment, and ultimately later on, goes further. As Miles said, I was exceedingly happy to again be in the line and elated with the additional rank and responsibility that this new commission gave me as a field officer. That wasn't the only thing that changed as a result of Seven Pines. Charles Fuller wrote about this. Before this battle, Colonel Barlow, if this damn thing would work, Colonel Barlow was highly rated for his military scholarship. After the battle, he was recognized by his superior officers as one of the bravest of the brave. So within the span of 1 year, private, first in his class, Harvard Law, Francis Channing Barlow, has gone from just that, 1-day-long honeymoon, survived the Great Cabal, assumes command of the regiment, and leads it into their first test. And gets a new guy next to him, a new friend. We're going to skip a little bit, because my goal is not to talk about the military exploits of the unit, of which there are plenty. One of their finest hours is just up the road. By that point, they're brigaded under a guy named John Caldwell, 61st New York, 5th New Hampshire, 81st PA. Are they with them at that point? And the 64th New York, so 2 different 60 New Yorks. Barlow, after Seven Pines, complained to the governor, saying that, take us out of line now so we can regroup and refit, or add another unit to us and let me have command of both of the regiments. Ta-da, 61st, 64th New York will combine and fight together. You can find plenty of letters written by members of the 64th New York. You cannot find plenty of letters written by men of the 61st. I don't know why, but there you have it. Barlow is responsible for the best action that the United States Army takes on the day of September 17th, 1862. What does he do? Throwing it out to you. What does Barlow do on the 17th of September up the road? What's the 61st do at Antietam? They take it. He comes up, swings around, comes down the whole length of it, capturing with it 3 stands of colors and 300 to 400 prisoners. And then the 61st advances towards the road. And then all of a sudden, that's the visitor center. What happens? They turn that way and shoot that way for a little bit. And then they return back to their main line. And then they advance through a cornfield. And then a shell comes flying through the air. boom, explodes. And there you have that. Francis Barlow out of commission. But who's there to save the day? His wife. There she is. Lady on the left, 1864. She dies in the service of her country, right, as a nurse. One doctor who served with her said that here in an open field she toiled under the scorching sun with no shelter from the pouring rains, with no thought but for those who were suffering and dying all around her. So many memories of her rich and glowing sympathies, her warm and loving nature, that I feel how inadequate would be any tribute I could pay to her work. There you are, a husband and wife doing all they can for not just themselves. I mean, Barlow at the end of the day, right? He's doing stuff for himself, but putting his men forward. Here she is putting many men forward as well, dying in that service. Barlow's out of commission. Who takes over the regiment? Captain, then quickly Lieutenant Colonel, then quickly Colonel Nelson Appleton Miles. On the right is a man named K. Oscar Brody. Brody is a veteran of the Swedish military. Comes to America. Captain, takes 2 companies from Hamilton College, Colgate area, brings them down. By May of 1863, he is now the lieutenant colonel of the regiment. He will become the colonel of the regiment after this man is seriously wounded, a place called Chancellorsville. Anybody been there? Right? Place called McLaw's Drive. On their driving tour, big open field you can walk in. Gets overlooked because that guy from VMI did something with a whole bunch of men, right? But McLaw's will get wounded. Miles gets wounded. He'll earn the Medal of Honor for his actions at Chancellorsville, allowing Brody to take charge of the regiment. And Brody will take the unit all the way through the Battle of Gettysburg, right? Taking those 110 men into the wheat field to lose 50 men. And then the next day, some of them are told, hey, there's a whole bunch of cannons up the line here. You might need to help out. So some of the 61sters are involved in the repulse of Pickett's charge, servicing some cannons along the wall. Brody will take the regiment into the next year, Battle of the Wilderness. By that point, they have a new divisional commander. Oh, by the way, here's Nelson Miles, 1863, camping around Culpeper, Library of Congress. If you go on there, better view than what you've got on this screen. Barlow gets back to his relationship with the 61st. Right? He's their division commander by 1864. Go to the Wilderness, you'll blink and find the spot where the 61st was, because they're on the extreme left end of the United States Army. Right? Brock Road, as it heads towards Spotsylvania, you blink there because there's a whole bunch of traffic there today. You'll miss where they are. Barlow wanted to get involved in the fighting, was instead told stay all the way to the left. A week later, though, he is involved in the action. Bloody Angle. Barlow's division leads the push. Miles's brigade leads the assault. 61st New York is at the point of attack of that assault. And they are the first unit to pierce the Confederate line, the Muleshoe, on the morning of the 12th of May, 1864. One of the men making that attack is here. His name, Isaac Plum. Plum enlisted in the 61st New York at the ripe old age of 20. Born in 1842. Speaking of the fighting around, following the battle of the Bloody Angle there, he says that I feel thankful for my preservation thus far, but our work is not done. I hope, my dear parents, I may be spared for your sake, not my own. I look forward to the time when I might prove to you that I was not ungrateful for your kindness and goodness to me. A couple weeks later, the regiment is involved in another massive attack, Cold Harbor. Plum writes about that. I occupied one hole about the center of my line, and I could not get out of it through the whole day without being riddled with bullets. If a man stuck his head above his little fort more than a little while, a rebel bullet would whiz by. 2 days later, June 11th, 1864, 22-year-old Isaac Plum writes a letter home. Well, in a journal. This one's in a journal. The universal feeling here is that a soldier who does his whole duty and comes out alive at the end of 3 years in active service, especially in an infantry regiment, has done his share. Later that day, he wrote, "We witnessed many dead boys in blues scattered over the ground. The next morning, both sides were intent on killing all their enemies they can get their eyes onto." The next morning, June 12th, 1864, 22-year-old Isaac Plum, far away from home, seriously wounded. 3 weeks later, July 4th, 1864, Isaac Plum, 22 years old, dead. Another soldier in this storied unit is a guy named William Horace Nims. Here he is. I'm going to come around because I forgot to put him on the PowerPoint. 17th of June, 1860. Oh, hello, people in TV land. Good quality? There we go. So here's Nims. 17 June, 1864. Nims will receive a wound struck by a fragment of shell which evacuated the humors of the right eye and fractured the nasal bones. Anybody want to see it? Guess what didn't kill him? People in TV land? Oh, I'm going to do that. Nims went on to live in Alexandria, drowned in the Potomac River, grave nowhere to be found. Over the course of the entire war, 1,526 officers and men serve in the regiment. Of that, 11 officers killed in action, 113 enlisted men killed in action, 5 officers wounded, 67 wounded, 2 officers wounded and then later died. Of disease, 2 officers, 134 enlisted. Total, 18 officers dead, 314 enlisted men. 46 of them died as prisoners of war. Where can we find these men? Up the road, Antietam National Cemetery. Find them in Petersburg. You can find them in Richmond, Fredericksburg. Some of the most hallowed of cemeteries in this nation, right? Arlington. You can find them in Alexandria. You can find them in Michigan. Men that lived, right? You can find them in Brookline, Massachusetts. You can find Barlow in Brookline. Miles, Arlington. Who are those men? Right? They're the men that have a name to them, a story to them. All right, nearly died in the service of his nation, and grave is nowhere to be found. But what about the men who died at Antietam, or Fredericksburg, or Gettysburg, that now sleep either under the words unknown or whose resting place is unknown? After the war, this thing is put up. Who's been to Gettysburg? Well, here they are. The dedication of the 61st New York Monument TV world. Da, 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 da. This is a plug for why those people should have been here. And there we go. By the way, Charlie Fuller is in this photo. Charlie Fuller, the man that wrote that. Come up later words, I can show you you can get a better sense of it. But in the dedication of that monument, they talk about what it meant to serve in the unit, to fight with these men, and the service that they did. And I want to share with you 2 comments made by men there to wrap up. Charlie Fuller, she furnished 2 major generals, Barlow, Miles. She was small in number, but had prodigal sons in abundance. No good man who ever served in her ranks would ever today exchange her number for that of any other. There was but little in her makeup of fuss and feathers, but it was solid work. Her blows told, and if her enemy ever came to personally know her, he must have respected her courage and endurance. Wrap up with this one. Lee Nutting, a captain who was in that photo, says, its memories are enshrined in all our hearts. You will teach your children and children's children to reverence its memory and tell them of its deeds until they are proud to exclaim, my father belonged to and fought in the 61st New York. The regiment that gave to the country 2 great generals, that captured 4 flags and brought home its own unsullied by traitors' touch, that on 2 occasions captured more prisoners than it had in its ranks, and that while willing to shake hands with the old Johnnies, never forgot that we fought for freedom and union, and they for slavery and disunion, and that we stood for the right, and they stood for the wrong. Thank you. And real quick, one of the most famous paintings, right? Who's seen this painting before? Do me a favor. Look at the number on the hat. And you will find out why Colonel Barlow's cousin painted this. You heard that, right? Winslow Homer? Another great man right here. So, read one of his letters. He calls his cousin bald, and he's like, why are you getting bald, for goodness sake? But any questions about anything? Hopefully I didn't go too far over. No? Okay.
When was the monument dedicated?
I forget the date. I should have written that down. July 2nd, 18...
Go over the initial problem you started with where, was it cones?
Cone, like an ice cream cone.
Cones. If he was so bad and they drummed him out of the permanency, so to speak, how did he have the ability to get back in and take over again, like he did? I didn't quite understand that part.
So Fuller in his memoir talks about that the officer corps had voted around, and they didn't demand that he leave, or they didn't have any solid backing, right? There was no real, signing from the governor or signing from some general officer.
Lack of confidence?
Lack of confidence is what caused them to.
Present that to him.
They presented that to him.
Right.
They all voted and said, "Hey, buddy, we voted. See you later." There was nothing really official but he left. They moved their camp, and then Fuller talks about that there were rumblings amongst the enlisted men that there was rumors, right, that Cone was coming back, because there was nothing from the governor, nothing in writing that said, you are discharged. That didn't come. The official word for him losing the colonelcy didn't come till May of 1862.
The brigade commander intervened and either made a decision one way or the other?
This is while they were still in New York. So this is while they're still gathering, mustering, waiting for companies to show up.
So they're not official?
No. It was just a whole bunch of guys saying, yeah, we don't want you. And then he comes back and says, probably like, hey, I know all these people, and if you don't let me play, I'm going to tell on you and you and you and you and you. So, but when they get to 1862, that great cabal that gets together to push him out, Howard was their brigade commander, and he had received a whole bunch of letters from New York, some basically telling him, hey, we hear this is going on. Please let us know what is happening so that if we need to intervene, we can. Cone talks about that there are many nights during this that he goes over to Dan Sickles' headquarters and is just welcomed greatly, right? And that Sickles just opens the door and lets him crash on whatever chair he wants. So Cone had a lot of support from up above, and which is why he said, I know I'm right. Call the court of inquiry and myself. I'm not going to, because thinking in his mind, right? I've already been cleared once, but now this is the real army, this is the real system, and it never got to that point because he just said, yeah.
How many of the officers that tried to get rid of him the first time were part of the cabal the second time around?
So here comes the fun part. So some of the stuff, so that, remember that at the very beginning, when I was mentioning how I got into the 61st, the reenacting group, I think I probably said this at dinner, but the folks that folks that have been in this reenacting group for a while or who have been researching the regiment, and I've just tagged on and then gotten deeper into it. In all their time doing it, they haven't been able to find any documentation, and this is where, if you know where to look, I would be happy to hear you out. No, they haven't, courts-martial, you can find paperwork anywhere. I haven't, they haven't, nobody I've asked has been able to find any of the documentation of the court of inquiry into him. So in terms of the exact names of who wrote against him, there's no specifics that I've been able to find.
Do you know how many officers were still in the regiment from the first time to the second?
Only 2 left from the first time, and that was
another year. I mean,
right. I mean,
churn.
I wouldn't think that many were different, yeah, by that point. But if any of you know where to find courts of inquiry information, hey, Matt, if you know, I'd be in your debt. Yes, sir.
At the monument dedication,
Yes.
Miles, Barlow there?
No. Barlow, post-war, right? Barlow known for becoming Attorney General for the state of New York and kicking out Boss Tweed, Tammany Hall, right? Putting that whole thing down. He never met John Gordon, right? The whole Gordon-Barlow incident. Gordon was not present. Barlow or Miles were not present at the dedication. Haven't been able to figure out why, but they were, yeah. I mean, all the letters, all the writings are talking about how great they are. All the speeches, Nutting and Fuller and the others all say, we had 2 generals, woohoo! But as far as I can tell, they weren't. I mean, if they were there, why aren't they in here? Right.
So as far as all the guys enlisted from New York, are mostly immigrants or not, or short, recent immigrants, I guess I should say?
So I'm currently my ultimate goal is to write a regimental history on them. So right now I'm trying to get, because when you've got a regiment that was in the wheat field, that was the bloody, right, all these big premier locations, there's not much new to add to understanding of, we had charged at a wall at Fredericksburg, and then, So what I'm trying to do now is get at exactly that, right? Building the roster as much as possible. I mean, the New York State Military Museum has the Adjutant General's report with all the roster, but it doesn't get into, place of burial or family history, or some of them have an occupation. So I can't fully answer that yet, but the basic bare bones I can tell you, right, is 7 were from the city, 3 weren't, and the 3 that weren't were college students. But also 60 to 70-year-olds suffering from, as you heard of the surgeon, right, ulcers. That, when I found that surprised the heck out of me, right? So, but yes, long story short, I can't fully answer that yet.
What do you attribute Barlow's fast rise to? Was he really that good, or what did he bring to it that go from a lower-ranking officer to a lieutenant colonel?
So in the case of Seven Pines, he gets a lot of commendation from Howard, his immediate brigade commander, from Sumner, they all talk about this man's willingness to take that extra step, right? Try to what's the word choice? I lost it. Daring, sort of like the daring, right? To go that extra step of trying to do more. And so after Seven Pines, he goes to Antietam, breaks through a Confederate line, captures colors, captures men. By that point, gets wounded, but there had already been enough push for him. Right in November, he gets a brigadier general's. He gets a star. And who's the guy that presents him with his commission? Right, the 21-year-old Isaac Plum. So it's a lot. I think it has a lot to do with his daring nature, his men loving him, his leadership.
It's also a Hartford grad and has a lot of friends.
Connections too. Yeah. I mean, like who's his second wife? Right, Robert Goulshaw's sister. Right, so connections, abilities coming together. I think. No, he just goes, no, right. I mean, his men love him so much, right, that they leave him to die. Right, by that point, the Germans just let him say, oh, Kate, we're having enough. But I will say, in his defense, the only 11th Corps unit that doesn't get at Chancellorsville is a brigade commanded by Francis Barlow. Not from his own doing, but Dan Sickles' own doing, right? Dan Sickles spots the Confederates out there and is like, yoo-hoo, they're out here. And he takes his entire corps plus one brigade of the 11th. And luckily for Barlow and his men, right, they happen to be that one brigade that is missing in action at that point. But, yes, sir.
I'm kind of confused here.
Yes.
The 61st would start off with the Second Corps, right?
The whole war they were Second Corps.
Yeah, the Second Corps,
Yeah.
which Barlow was part of.
Yes.
But in Gettysburg, Barlow is in the
11th.
Corps.
Yeah, so
when did he?
after he gets wounded at Antietam, he basically loses when he gets that star, he loses that close relationship because then they give him a brigade command in the 11th Corps. And then once Charles Devens, his division commander, after Chancellorsville is outed, Barlow just rises to that command. Then after Gettysburg, after that wound, reorg army, then he's back to commanding a division in the 2nd Corps.
Okay.
So for a year, he's not associated with them. Well, thank you. Yes?
Is there anything written there? You say he's got connections, and all who are these connections with? Is that available?
So there is one biography, to my understanding, that has ever been written about the man. There is an essay in a UNC book from, the Cold Harper to the Crater, that has an essay about him. As far as I know, those are the only two Barlow anythings that have ever been published. He never wrote a memoir. I've heard 2 or 3 people that are writing books or stuff about him. If you follow the emerging Civil War, there's Sarah Byerly, who works at the ABT, the Trust, the American Battlefield Trust. You type in Barlow on their site, she's written a whole bunch of stuff about him. So as far as I know, there are only 3 people that have had enough interest to want to put anything out about the man.
Sounds like it might have been like Hancock and Howard.
Right. Well, Hancock is definitely a big fan of him, yeah, and that relationship. His letters, and that book is, I was going to bring it with me. The name, it's Semito is the name of the editor who put it together. Fear Was Not in Him is the name of the collection of letters. And then The Boy General is the name of the book about Barlow. And Fuller, his stuff, Personal Collections of the War of 1861, archive.org. You can hop on there and you can read a free copy digitally, or hop on Amazon and find a 10, 50. This is an Amazon edition. I forget how much I put out for this, but you can see it has been well loved with all the, some of the pages have notations in them. Well, yes, sir.
There's a, you know, the context, like, many years ago, I was reading a book about the transcendentalist.
Mm.
And there was this one chapter, and it mentioned him and his connections to other people in Massachusetts, in Boston, you know, and, you know, talk about Sean and
Yeah, yeah.
everything that he was.
Right, and when his father left him the family at a young age, and the mother relocates them to Massachusetts, right? Brook Farm, the name of the transcendentalist community that he's involved in there. My interest in Barlow is not so much in the, like, I understand his upbringing and understand all that, but to me, what struck me, and the reason why I got into the 61st in him, is that ability to go from a nobody in the sense of militarily, and is able to just do a 180, and is able to, he's in the best places at the right time, right? And he's able to take that on-the-job training and brings it to fruition. So I see Matt keeps looking at me.
If there's more questions, by all means.
So this is the first time that I've actually word vomited all of this in front of a group. So this has been 2 years in the making, thanks to COVID and then other stuff. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you. If you want to see any of these pictures, come on up.
Thank you once again for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Join us next month. We're going to have Chris Bryan out to speak about the Union 12th Corps and specifically his book, Cedar Mountain to Antietam. So it's going to be another great talk. I hope you all can join us then. And again, thank you very much for our speaker this evening.